behalf of the Embassy of Denmark in India, may I welcome you to India and Denmark, our shared green future. Now, earlier this year, the Prime Ministers of India and Denmark agreed upon a historic green strategic partnership. Now, this unique partnership includes in its purview businesses, academia, research, science and technology, and education. Today's interactive session promises to not only decode, but also allow a peep into the mindset of diplomats working to put together such partnerships. The Embassy of Denmark would like to thank CII, the Confederation of Danish Industry, Climate Collective, and the Indian-Danish Chamber of Commerce. My name is SURESH. VENKAT. I will be your moderator for this session. Let me start by introducing our panelists. We have His Excellency Freddy Svane. He's the Danish Ambassador to India. His Excellency Ajit, Gupte, the Indian Ambassador to Denmark. Dr. VIBHA DHAWAN, Distinguished Fellow at TERI. Finn Mortensen is the Executive Director, State of Green, Denmark. And Mihir Sharma is a Senior Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. Let me start with Ambassador Svane. Ambassador, a few opening remarks from you about this partnership.
Thank you very much indeed, SURESH VENKAT, and happy to see my good friends from across India, and of course Ambassador Ajit Gupte from Copenhagen. We are in fact the partners of this. Without this close cooperation that we have had, we would not have come to this shared green future of India and Denmark. I am extremely happy that we can have this opportunity today to dig a little bit deeper into it and try to enlighten all about this perspective. As Prime Minister Modi put it, it is an agreement of the new age. And seen from a Danish point of view, of course, this is a unique partnership because it combines our green ambitions that we have nurtured in our society for long and put it into the context of development that India has undertaken for a long, long time. We have the skills, India has the scale, but jointly we'll add the speed and of course the scope of what we are doing is attractive beyond India, beyond Denmark. So I think we have put together a milestone that will take us into a future. So it's not just about a shared future, it's also about shaping the future. And I hope that all the academias, all the businesses, all the politicians, and all those who are caring about the future, that we will stay together, change things, make things happening, stay green, tune our future into a green recipe. That's the only answer to all the challenges that we are facing. So happy to be part of this and looking forward to a very good dialogue about the future that we have undertaken on both sides. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Gupte, I'm going to come over to you next for a few opening remarks on this partnership.
Well, thank you. I think it's very appropriate and timely that you have organized this interaction, which focuses on the Green Strategic Partnership and the way forward. And let me thank participation from TERI and ORF and the State of Green. And of course, welcome my good friend, the Ambassador of Denmark, Freddy Svane, with whom we have very good coordination. The Green Strategic Partnership is notable because it is the first such agreement that India has signed with any country, or which Denmark has signed with any country. It is highly relevant for India because as a country which is pushing towards modernization and urbanization, we are now facing large-scale challenges in terms of dealing with pollution, air pollution, land, and our water bodies. While we have excellent achievements in a number of sectors, we have very advanced pharmaceutical, biotechnology, automobiles, electronics, and other sectors, and of course the services sector, the IT and ICT sectors. This is an area where perhaps we need to focus on. Denmark, like many other Western countries, went through a process of industrialization and modernization. They faced the same challenges which we are facing today. They faced this about 20 or 30 years ago, but they have cleaned up the environment. The technology is present. Danish companies are already deeply involved in India. They can scale up and deliver. There is a lot of potential for more tie-ups, joint ventures, transfers of technology. And I would urge not only companies, but also scientists and civil society to focus on the possibilities and ensure that we move towards a clean and green India.
Thank you, Ambassador Gupte. Mihir Sharma, let me start this discussion with you. Now, India is likely to bet big on renewable energy over the next century, next 10, 20 years to start with. So how do you see renewables impacting India's energy mix in the next decade?
Well, thank you, Suresh, and thank you for having this discussion. I think that very quickly, I'll just first give a sense of the context of what has been achieved so far, because that really puts into perspective the degree of ambition that India is showing in this particular sector. India has essentially now the cheapest installed grid-connected solar in the world. In fact, for both for solar and wind, the weighted average total installed cost, which is the measure that the industry uses, is around 620 kilowatts. That's the largest in the world, and it has the largest decline in the world over the past 10 years. So it's declined by 85% since 2010. And it's cheaper, both solar and wind are now cheaper in 2020 than the cheapest fossil fuel option for new capacity. So that gives you a sense of what has been achieved so far. And in terms of the momentum, the electricity regulator, India's central electricity regulator, came out with a briefing earlier this year on its models of power capacity in 2030. And there it expects that together, non-fossil fuel-based capacity in 2029-2030 is going to be 2/3 of India's installed capacity. And they will contribute about half of all generation. And this is in spite of, I want to sort of emphasize this target expectation, is in spite of the fact that our demand for electricity, because we are a growing country and our economy is growing, our population is growing, will continue to increase at about 6, 8, 10% every year. So this is an enormous ambition that we are showing. I do want to have a word of caution here that the immediate targets that we have for 2022 of 175 gigawatts of renewable energy are in jeopardy right now. And they're in jeopardy because of not just the pandemic, because of other issues related to financing of the sector. So in spite of our achievements and in spite of our ambition, in the medium term, we're going to continue to need a lot of effort and a lot of help in this sector.
Right, let me ask you a follow-up. Both solar and wind have an intermittent nature to their energy. How are we going to manage this if they're going to be 2/3 of India's energy mix?
Two answers to that. And the first is that the electricity regulator was very clever in how it defined non-fossil fuels, because it included, of course, hydropower projects and nuclear energy and biomass as well, which is significant in certain areas of India. So there are other forms of non-fossil fuel energy that might manage this. We are not betting in this prediction on enormous increases in storage capacity. But nevertheless, in the shorter term, we are seeing that over 2020 in particular, and this is a recent development, many of the projects of the tenders that are being issued for new renewable energy projects are specifically for 24/7 projects. So you're going to put in something and then your guarantee is that you will be providing a certain amount of energy 24/7 into the grid. So even when the sun is not shining. So in fact, what in new tenders that are going out, it is not uncommon to want to build in storage capacity sufficient. So you overbuild your storage capacity, you overbuild your solar capacity in order to ensure that at least a smaller percentage of that goes out into the grid 24/7. And that's, I think, how we're managing it.
Thank you, Mihir. Let's move from energy to agriculture. Dr. Dhawan, you're an expert in agriculture. Is India in need of a second green revolution?
If we look at India as a country, I'll say we are still struggling with affordability of food as well as malnutrition. And let me come back a bit on first green revolution, what good it has done and maybe precautions we need to take today. It was heavily dependent on irrigation, use of pesticides, fertilizers, and seeds with one objective, and that was productivity. So we concentrated on few crops, largely cereals, and somewhere in the bargain, we lost on nutrition part of it. And that's the reason that malnutrition is a big problem with our country. Now, second green revolution, when we are looking at, and we need to learn a lot from other countries, including Denmark, is first of all, that it has to be sustainable agriculture production. There shouldn't be excessive use of water, even fertilizers and so on, because what is fertilizer is doing, it is also polluting our groundwater, which in many villages people directly drink. Pesticides, it's causing cancer. So we have to move towards precision agriculture so that what every drop contributes to production, every drop of fertilizer is utilized by the crop, and we return back to the soil. Other thing is it shouldn't get restricted to some crops. It should be to millets and other lesser known crops which provide nutrition to larger population. And we have to remember we are largely a vegetarian country. So crop plants have to contribute a lot. And I'll also touch upon the cattle and fish, because there again, the kind of feed we are giving to our animals is not that good. And with the result, greenhouse emissions are very high, gas emissions are very high. So what is it that you can reduce on it, get more of milk, and technologies such as artificial insemination, so one can get the sperm from other countries and improve the quality of our animals to give us more milk. And last, but one of the most important factor is that post-harvest technologies, they need to be improved so that nothing goes waste, because all your research efforts, you can increase productivity by 20% or whatever, but today we are losing 35% of our total produce. So that needs to be taken care of. So there is definitely a need more towards sustainable production. And another thing which we keep on debating is that while we are certifying our crops as organic or naturally produced, there is no certification in terms of sustainably produced. GAP touch upon the conditions of the farm, of farm workers, but it doesn't talk about use of natural resources. So that's something which should come out clearly in agriculture, not just in India, but world over.
Thank you, Dr. Dhawan. Now let's move from the second green revolution to climate change. Finn Mortensen, political leaders around the world are in agreement broadly that tackling climate change is going to be one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century. What role do you see for the private sector in fighting climate change?
Thank you very much for having me on this very important seminar today. And I would also like to thank all the people who have been working very hard, I know, for several months to finalize the Indo-Danish Green Strategic Partnership Agreement. I think it's a very important step on the way. As far as the private sector is concerned, I just need to stress that State of Green, which I represent, is in itself what you call a public-private partnership, not for profit. I think, at least in my mind, it goes to show that the private sector is extremely important in this area. You can say that the private sector itself needs to engage and adapt to climate change. Private sector can actually deliver the solutions that are necessary. In many instances, they can also deliver finance, and finally also support others in delivering on the climate change issues. So I think, to sum up, governments can provide the framework, the political framework necessary, and we can come back to that later when we discuss the wind industry in particular, but private sector is where you will find the content and actually also the driving force ahead. So I think you can say the private sector simply is key to achieving the very ambitious climate goals.
Thank you, Finn. Let me come back to Ambassador Svane. Ambassador, one of the things that we promised people who are attending this webinar is a peek into the mind of a diplomat. So we're going to peek into your mind now. Now, a partnership like this one takes many months, maybe years of background work by diplomats such as yourself. Give us a sense of what went into the background of this partnership. How much work did it take and what did it take?
There are two answers to it. First and foremost, it's also about the timing, in the sense that the world is facing a lot of challenges when it comes to green transformation. India is in the process of furthering its development, and Prime Minister Modi has decided to follow the sustainability as a guiding principle. So time was right for this kind of thing. The second answer, of course, it's the hard work. My very good friend, Ajit Gupte, the Indian ambassador to Copenhagen, has been working for 3 years almost in Denmark to really secure that our relations got better and better. And we brought it to a position where we could naturally come up with this idea of having a green strategic partnership. I also spent time on it. I've been serving in India before. So of course, when I came back, we started looking into how we could connect India under the new India vision of the Honorable Prime Minister of India. And then I think the ambitions were very clear on both sides. We wanted really to reach out to each other and given our background as a clean tech nation, we have a lot of experiences in the green transformation. Then it became very, very natural for us to work together. And then, as Finn Mortensen is highlighting, the private sector is also a driver wherever it makes sense. And of course, it's important that the private sector is moving on. And the private sector was really developing its own kind of trajectory here in India. So it was just about bringing the political ambitions together and secure that we were thinking along the same lines. And I think that is what the Green Strategic Partnership is about. It called for a lot of teamwork on both sides and also agreement about the overarching objective. So that's why we have it. It was natural, it was logical, but it's also the only reasonable answer to the challenges that we are facing, all of us, beyond India, beyond Denmark. It's a global issue and we have to work together.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Gupte, let's hear the Indian side of this story. Why was Denmark specifically chosen for this partnership?
Well, as Ambassador Freddy Svane said, in the last few years, we have been able to improve our relations in a very remarkable manner. And I think it's been a great experience for myself, and I'm sure Freddy also. Denmark, although it's a small country of 5.8 million people, is a sort of global superpower in terms of not only evolving best practices, but also in implementing them. It has a number of world-class companies which are global players in renewable energy, in smart farms, in enzymes, which are very effective in food processing. So I just want to mention some of the sectors and some of their achievements, which is really quite incredible. I think the first is renewable energy. It's a very windy country in Northern Europe. 47% of the energy produced last year came from wind, out of which 28% came from offshore wind. So Denmark was the first country to develop offshore wind, and it's a global leader in that. Another 20 to 22% is coming from biomass. So they do use a lot of biomass, forest residue, agricultural waste, etc. And they have been able to ensure that they are able to integrate the renewable energy into a grid and ensure security of electricity supply. So what we have put together is a strategic cooperation program. We've signed a number of agreements. A number of Indian experts are being trained. Because you see, as we ramp up our renewables, we will have to be able to integrate it effectively into the grid. And there's a lot for us to learn. Danish companies, particularly in the wind energy sector, are active in India. In fact, Vestas and LM Wind have been expanding quite rapidly. And they're also exporting a lot from India. VIBHA mentioned about agriculture and animal husbandry. I think we've all heard of high productivity of Danish cattle. They do produce a lot of very high quality cattle, and we are aware of their contribution to a white revolution. We are trying to take that forward. She did mention about the same-sex semen. So there are some batches which are to go. There is collaboration there which is in the pipeline. They have been able to reduce water consumption and fertilizer use in agriculture very extensively. Again, lessons for us. Thirdly, I think in water, the area of water where we do face a grave crisis, Denmark has been able to reduce its water consumption by 40% since 1980. And it has this unique thing where they've identified large groundwater aquifers by helicopter, and they depend on this source for 99% of their water supply. They don't use surface water, they use groundwater aquifers, but they only take out the water on a rechargeable and renewable basis. The quality of the water, therefore, is excellent. I think this is something we need to learn from. Also, their non-revenue water loss is only about 5%. In several cities in South Asia, including in India, the water loss is about 50 to 60%. So water, I think, is another area. Another area which we need to focus on is waste management and recycling and cleaning up the environment. Here again, there are a number of companies which are active. We have 4 of the first paddy waste to energy units which have been set up in Punjab and Haryana. There is scope for more. We have a company making catalytic converters. Their factory will start early next year, which will supply a large number to one of our truck companies. But there's a whole range of other companies, small and medium, which have technology also for managing industrial waste. The State of Green has a very useful website. And I do hope that we can utilize the technology available to establish partnerships and scale up, as Honorable Prime Minister has said. Denmark has the skills while India has the scale.
Okay, Denmark has the skills and India has the scale. Mahesh Sharma, coming back to you. Now, one of the non-negotiables in India seems to be the strong focus on growth. So I have a triple header question for you. The triple question is, how can India continue to grow equitably, and keep our commitments to climate change targets? How are we going to pull this triple whammy off?
I think that I'll answer that in three ways, and then with 3 points. First, though, I think the background here is that I think you're being a little optimistic when you say continue to grow. The fact is that over the past few years, even from before the pandemic, we've seen India lose a lot of its growth momentum. There are multiple reasons for this. We don't need to go into this, but essentially, I think that a lot of people have understood that whatever was driving the Indian economy earlier, growth in consumer demand, growth in private investment, these engines have stopped. That brings us to essentially how we're going to sort of revive them. And the choice, in some sense, between, and we have to be cold-eyed about this, and we have to recognize that there are choices to be made. India, if it intends to honor its Paris Agreement targets, if it intends to contribute to carbon mitigation and to the fight against climate change, will not be able to grow the way that China did. And this is something that is on some level upsetting. We've lost out on the chance at resource-rich, resource-intensive development, which is the easiest form of development. But on the other hand, I think that we have now accepted, the government has accepted, many Indians have accepted that there is no alternative if we want to keep the planet secure. If we have to break out a new path of development, one that no country has done before, and definitely not at this scale, the fact is that we are going to find a new engine of development. And the hope that many of us have is that creating new industries, new opportunities for investment, new directions for investment that are related to climate change mitigation, that are related to carbon mitigation, related to climate change and carbon adaptation, and related to new technologies that power the green transformation. We hope that these will be at least sufficient to drive investment into the Indian economy, both by Indian savers and crucially by investment abroad. Because given the slide in Indian growth momentum, the only thing that can revive it is new directions for investment and new sources of investment from abroad. And this is why, for example, Denmark, other Nordic countries are very crucial in that they have large pools of savings that recognize the importance of the green transformation elsewhere in the world. And the last point I should make, because you asked very specifically about how can we ensure that growth is inclusive, I think we have to recognize that any transformation, if it takes hold of the Indian economy sufficiently to power growth, has been any sector that's driven the Indian economy forward has typically been inclusive. If you want to think about telecommunications, which is one of the great sectors that powered the Indian growth story in the 2000s, that was very inclusive. It raised boats all over the country. It raised the growth boat even in parts of the country which had typically not seen growth, such as the Hindi heartland. And the example that I always give in order to try and fix this in people's head is when you went in the early part of the 2000s, somewhere where telecommunications had just begun to reach, where STDs, trunk dialing, where direct dialing had just started off, you discovered that people were creating livelihoods around it, maybe for just 4 or 5 years, but enough to give them a start. You know, there would be phone booths. There would be people, even to this day, you have people who make a living off selling accessories for mobile phones. What I mean is not just the big factories producing the mobile phones, not just the telecom companies, but an entire ecosystem of small and medium enterprises around that. In a true green transformation, you would be able to create that ecosystem of small enterprises, people living off the transformation sufficiently to give them a start into other businesses. And I think that is typically how India has gone ahead. If we want to, for example, have electric vehicles in the center of India, it's one thing to get a technology about it. It's one thing to create the factories around it. But you also need to create the charging infrastructure that gives people jobs. For example, 17 people asking you for a parking ticket in Central Delhi, but 17 people offering to charge your car. The fact is that this is how growth happens in India, and we have to accept it. Our solutions are different, and we have to put them into place.
We'll get back into that kind of jugaad of the small enterprise a little later in the discussion. Dr. DHAWAN, I'm coming to you next. Indian industry is not known for investing large sums of money into research. But research into eco-friendly products and processes are going to be a key part of the green agenda of both countries. What impact will a partnership like this one that we have with Denmark on the research ecosystems of both countries? How will it impact it?
I'll put it this way, and as repeatedly said, that Denmark has the skill and India has the scale. So there are a large number of technologies which are available over there, but then those technologies are not something that you can simply adopt them to Indian ecosystem. They need to be fine-tuned. They need to be tested here. Its attitude, the way we work is very different from a developed economy like Denmark. So even the way we collect waste is so different. And in the past, we have seen even the waste treatment plants, they have failed because we said that the organic content of the waste in India was very low. But that kind of study needs to be done. The important thing today is that we all have to understand, and I put it this way, that globally, it has to be recognized that we have one planet to live and so much to share. And development in isolated pockets is not going to help unless and until large countries like India are taken care of. So joint research is something which is extremely important. And I'm very happy to note that there are a large number of initiatives which have already been taken by Department of Biotechnology, Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Husbandry, Food Safety and Standard Authority of India, and so on. So it is basically learning, getting the technology and fine-tuning. It's also developing technologies together. That is one thing which is already on the cards. But I'd also like to say that it's not just one-way traffic. It's also that there are few things in which perhaps India is excelling. And over there, I'll put that Ayurveda or use of medicinal plants to impart immunity is something in which India is very good. And there it can perhaps give something to Denmark, like the recent example of mink animal getting COVID virus and large number of them being culled. Then it is that how can you provide natural immunity to these animals? And that is where India can contribute. And a step forward, and that would be a teaching. And of many negatives that COVID has taught us, one of the few positives is that online teaching can work very well. I was going through the list of universities and the kind of courses they are teaching. So it is catch them young, change the attitude. So the students sitting in India can actually be benefited by learnings from Denmark. And perhaps one can think of entering into collaboration with universities and offering those online courses so that they also learn on that aspect.
Thank you, Dr. Dhawal. Back to Finn Mortensen. Finn, let's talk about wind. Denmark is clearly the world leader in wind energy. I have two questions for you. A short history of how this was achieved and what's next, offshore wind, and what happens next to wind energy.
We are still a leader in wind in Denmark, and I think the story really goes some 50 years back. I would say there are at least three key components describe why we have reached the position we are in today. First of all, back in the early 70s, we had a number of, I would call them daring entrepreneurs, a rural blacksmith in Western Jutland who started talking to some farmers about putting up a wind turbine that they could use for their purposes on their farm. That developed gradually, and that's where Vestas comes from, the global leader. It was started out by a blacksmith. But he was not the only one. There were others back in the 70s who looked with interest at renewable energy. Secondly, I think also you need to take into consideration the economic support in the form of money from the government side for R&D, financial subsidies for investing and putting up infrastructure and development, and also economic subsidies to the wind producers. And finally, you could say the importance of political regulation over the years has been extremely important in various forms. For instance, there was a lot of pressure early on utilities in Denmark. New legislation was imposed on them. They should accept buying electricity from local and independent wind turbine producers. So I would say all of these play elements are important, and obviously you also have to take into consideration timing and luck. Luck in particular, because the Danish wind industry really took off after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986, I think it was. We had the Brundtland Report in 1987 on the state of the Earth. And I think again, it was in 85 or 86, the American market in California in particular came out of nowhere all of a sudden. And it helped Danish wind turbine manufacturers to start exporting. And they got, I think the first orders were more than 3,000 wind turbines, an enormous amount at the time. And it really has since then kept the Danish wind industry at a very, very state-of-the-art technology status in Denmark. And we still are the hub for the wind industry. We have foreign producers also who have decided to put their R&D in Denmark.
Thank you, Finn. Follow-up question to that. Offshore wind, how does that change the game in wind energy?
Offshore wind, again, has become very big in Denmark. We still have far more wind turbines on land than onshore, but most of them are relatively old and small. What we can have seen when it comes to offshore wind, when we are talking about several gigawatts in total in Denmark, is that the cost is very low, efficiency is extremely high, and we have pinpointed a number of areas in the North Sea in particular where wind conditions are extremely good. And the current government and parliament has just adopted a plan to invest even more in offshore wind farms, actually also to build what we call wind islands, where you build artificial islands and put up wind turbines offshore. Obviously, we can't use all that wind in Denmark on our own. We are very dependent on our neighboring countries. So the integration across borders is also extremely important. That's why Denmark is pushing ahead in the EU for that, just to mention one thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Ambassador Gupte, back to you. India has a long tradition of recycling and reusing products. We've been a circular economy ever since we were an economy, arguably. How does this strategic green partnership strengthen this idea of a circular economy within India?
We have had traditionally a system of recycling and reuse. And there are some things which Denmark can learn in this area. For instance, what we have tried to do in the recent past, I think, is drive down the amount of rubbish that we are producing. We really cut down on the single-use plastic. We've also reduced how much we consume. A simple example is many offices are using, instead of using bottled water, they are using water jugs. And this could something be easily replicated. In Denmark, they have started. But what I have seen here is that when you use technology, you can tackle the problems on a gigantic scale. Given the size of India's population and the size of our mega cities, which are 15 to 18 billion, and even our tier 2 cities are more populous than Denmark, 7, 8 million. There is an inexorable process of urbanization taking place in India. You cannot stop the generation of rubbish. You will have to use technology to get rid of it. There are only 3 ways, as I have spoken to experts here, what you can do with rubbish, which is one of the areas where I've done a fair amount of research. Either you segregate it into what can be recycled, and even with plastic, there is only a certain amount of recycling that you can do. You can't keep recycling. You can recycle it 3 or 4 times. The second is you identify what can be composted, the organic matter, and compost it. And the remainder you have to incinerate. So I am convinced, after having visited waste to energy plants, having met a lot of experts, that firstly we need to scale up even our recycling. I see over here that in every suburb they have a system. They're a very organized and disciplined society. So in every suburb you have a place where you can leave your leftover paint, your leftover clothes, your leftover furniture, your electrical items. After all, we are a huge population. We are in the process of becoming more prosperous. We cannot make do with the old traditional methods, the kabadi wala and the bhangar wala coming from house to house and collecting things. VIBHA said that, look, waste to energy plants, the low calorific value. I have visited, we've done a lot of research. They can burn everything. If you have less calorific value, you add. You add straw, you add wood chips, you add, as the Danish companies told me, we can burn everything except for water. They haven't yet found how to burn water, but they can do it. The advantage of Nordic countries is they are willing to transfer the technology at a fairly reasonable cost. They won't come and set up big waste to energy plant in India or a big recycling facility. They'll help you. So I think it helps us create jobs. If we have to clean up, then we have to start scaling it up. Even in the rural areas, there was a time when, the gobar, the cow dung, it was used. I myself have done it as a college kid, when we went to villages, we put it on the courtyard and the walls. But today people are living in regular houses. So you need to scale up. You go around Denmark, you see these large biodigesters everywhere. I'll give you a couple of examples. Because the dairy farms here are larger. The cow dung, it's collected in a sort of small tank. Then the truck comes, it's put into a truck. It goes to a biogas plant. You have the water treatment plants, the STPs. The rubbish is linked to a biogas plant there, and the biogas plant creates enough energy to drive the running of the STP. So there are a whole range of technologies which are available. We don't need to do research. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And the companies are ready to transfer. The Green Strategic Partnership gives us an opportunity to make, I think, significant change, but we need to find a model of doing it. I just want to make one more point. In Europe and the US, there is a tremendous move towards financing green projects in the circular economy. If you find a model to make it functional, you will find the finance. Finance is available. The technology is available. You will also create a new sector of activity, which will create jobs, which will help the climate and the environment. But some of the issues, quite frankly, fall within the domain of the government. They fall within the domain of the urban bodies. So we need to find a mechanism of being able to implement these projects.
Thank you, Ambassador Gupte. Mayor Sharma, I'm going to come to you. One of the things that Ambassador Gupte said is that we cannot stop generating rubbish. Almost every big Indian city, I live in Mumbai, we have mountains of garbage in all our cities. What will it take to turn this into an opportunity?
So I think that the issue here is we shouldn't pride ourselves too much on the circularity of our economy, at least in the past, because a lot of that was driven by the fact that we were a subsistence economy and you could find people to do the difficult and unpleasant task of separating the rubbish. And we've all grown up seeing this. Mm-hmm. And as fortunately, we become a little richer and we move towards being an upper middle income country, there will, we hope and pray, be fewer and fewer people who are willing to do the job under those conditions and at that pay. Which means that essentially the business proposition that it used to be will have ended. So you need to find another way to keep that commercial cycle going. And it's not going to come purely from government regulations. And we've seen that with some of the efforts we've made on plastic. It's not easy, right? The government can say, we no more plastic bags. People might continue to use them. It's not going to come completely from government regulation. It's not going to come completely from changes in behavior. That's a very difficult thing, again, to spread across at the scale that India is. It's going to have to come from a commercial proposition. And I think here, this is where you need innovators. You need to provide the finance to innovators who are trying out various ideas at the local level. The advantage of scale is that you can also have 1,000 ideas, of which maybe only one will work, but you need just one to work. That's how I think about it.
Thank you, Mayor. Ambassador Svane, back to you now. Now, this question is specific to the startup industry. India is a robust startup economy with thousands of startups. What opportunities does it offer to startups from both sides?
Thank you very much. I think it's a very, very important question, perhaps the most important question, because what we have talked about, Dr. Sharma and Dr. DHAWAN, and also Ambassador Ajit Gupte, for India not to just to copy what we have done in the West. You have to find your own way forward, and you have to do things better, greener, and more sustainable. And I think you are doing that. And I am really pleased that we cannot just export our technology to India, because India has a different context, a different kind of fabric. And therefore, it's so important that we have the Green Strategic Partnership, so that will really create kind of common drive to develop new technologies that are affordable, simple, resilient, robust, and so forth. And in that context, the startups are very, very important. India has perhaps one of the world's most resilient, progressive, advanced ecosystems for startups. And sorry, I will jump a little bit out of the Green Strategic Partnership. The other day, in fact, I was part of a visit to Hyderabad, where we were introduced to two companies in India doing vaccines for the fight against COVID-19. When I saw what these two companies have achieved, they are in fact the global suppliers of vaccines to all of us. What India has achieved, utilizing the mindset, the dedication, the technologies, and add the scale to it, it's remarkable. So I'm pretty sure that while we today are still talking about the climate changes and the Paris Agreement and so forth, I'm pretty sure a lot of the global answers to these issues, they are to be found in India. And therefore, I think this Green Strategic Partnership is so valuable. And that's why Honorable Prime Minister Modi has called it a partnership of the new age, because it's also a new mechanism where we really can connect with our skills. The scale of India and scalability is perhaps one of the most important answers to how we deal with the future challenges. So my hope and my dream is that this is not just about burning stubbles and all that in Punjab or Haryana. This is beyond all these kind of daily life issues. And hopefully India can set a new direction through the Green Strategic Partnership with our skills, our technologies, and hopefully India will manage, because without India, we will not be able to do anything on a global scale. India has to be part of the equation. That's why we are so proud and happy to have the Green Strategic Partnership in place. That's perhaps the best platform for startups. And India has a fantastic ecosystem of startups. So that's the way forward.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me ask the final question in this discussion before I take audience questions. And the final question to Dr. Dhawan. Dr. Dhawan, how will biofuel production impact Indian agriculture, positively and negatively?
If I talk of biofuels, of course, they are very, very important for our country, but they will have indirect impact on agriculture. Because when we started discussing about the biofuels, there was a lot of debate on food versus fuel. There was, I should say, criticism that government is worried about introducing biofuels at the cost of providing food to its people. Mm-hmm. But then there are large lands available where we are not doing agriculture. So if we grow crops that are important for biofuel, like jatropha and other crops, then it is that it's win-win, because first of all, you're taking care of CO2 sequestration, as well as land over a period of time will become more fertile. But then biofuel, today it has taken altogether a different direction, and that is to take care of crop residue and convert it into biofuels. So that is win-win, because otherwise what we are doing is large amount of crop residue is simply burnt in the field, and that adds to the air pollution as well. So if that can be converted for the production of biofuels, that will be very good. At the moment, technology is economically not viable, but government is very serious about it. They are providing a lot of subsidies. And at stage 1, we are at proof of concept. So we must prove that it can be done on a large scale. We are able to do it. I should say we are doing fairly well. We are also working on enzyme production indigenously, because right now enzyme is the major cause to break down the lignin and cellulose into the usable forms. So once we succeed, and there are successes, there are lots of leads. Department of Biotechnology, they have set up 5 centers of excellence to work in this direction. We are also looking at alga as a source of lipids or biofuel production, because in aquatic systems, it's much faster. And then the concept is not just biofuel, we are looking at biofuels and biocommodities. Pyrolysis is another part. So if the waste, whether it's the used cooking oil, other waste, if that can be converted into fuel, that is being worked into. So we are at different generations of biofuel production. We are also looking at crop residue, if that, or the spoiled grain, if that can be converted into biofuel. And when I'm talking of biocommodities, another important product which is coming up apart from other platform chemicals is bioplastic. So bioplastic, once you have produced it from, say, alga or any of the other biological material, that helps in much faster degradation of other agriculture residue or other waste as well. So it has, I should say, a lot of potential. In any case, by 2030, Government of India is committed that 20% of mixing will be with biofuels. So therefore, a lot of research is being done. Of course, here again, I'll say that one has to learn from Denmark in setting up of waste treatment plants. Much of our mandi waste and other waste is simply going to the land refills, and that's where one can set up plants and generate energy as well, apart from bioethanol. And one more thing which has very recently come, and that is the production of sanitizers in decentralized manner from the agriculture residue. So it can be either bioethanol, it can be biomethanol. So that is also being taken up by the government. So it will add to the economy and the village economy as well as hygiene of the people at affordable price.
Thank you, Dr. Bali. Right, time now to take a few audience questions. First question for Finn Mortensen. And Finn, this is a question to you as a Danish citizen, not as head of State of Green. Tanuja Pandey asks, share some of the ways in which sustainability is a way of life for regular Danish citizens, your day-to-day life.
I think one good example relates to children in Denmark. If you visit a Danish kindergarten, you'll see the small toddlers running around, and if one of them forgets to turn off the light in the bathroom, one of the others will point out, hey, you forgot to turn off the light, do that. Off, you forgot to turn off the water tap. So it's just an example of how ingrained it is in the Danish mindset that resources are scarce. We have learned that for decades in Denmark. I would say we have used what you call the stick and carrot method, the stick being very high taxes, the carrot economic incentives. I mentioned the economic incentives in wind before. They also, you find them in other areas in Denmark, insulation, for instance. If you, over the years, if you put in new windows or you insulate your houses for the cold winter in Denmark, you could get a tax rebate. But the tax part of it, the stick, is very high taxes on all kinds of resources. Water is extremely expensive in Denmark. Energy is expensive in Denmark. We have very, very high energy taxes. So that has also been one way of educating Danes that we need to be careful of using our energy resources. For instance, the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you don't use.
Next question is for Ambassador Gupte from Govinda Prasad. He says, are there any sectors in Denmark for which the transfer of technology from India to Denmark is possible?
Denmark, like some of the other Western European countries, is quite strong in engineering and biotechnology. I think there is a lot of scope for not only joint collaboration, but also mergers and acquisitions. There are a number of SMEs here. The trend is that the SMEs develop a technology, they grow to a certain level, and then they often sell. So I would encourage Indian companies to look out for opportunities here. And certainly in the IT sector, look, there are more than 30,000 Indian professionals which are supporting all the large major Danish companies develop their latest products and services from India. In addition, there are about 20 Indian companies here in the IT sector. They are all doing very well. They have recently, the last year, landed some very big projects. So I think it's a mix of untapped sort of opportunities. So I would urge people to look at it. And of course, today we have discussed at length in the clean tech area. Again, in clean tech, look, I'll give you examples. There are a couple of companies we came, they said we have excellent technology for cleaning the air. And they said that when they went to the municipalities here, they said that, look, the municipality said the air is already clean in Denmark and in Copenhagen. We don't need your technology. But we certainly do.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mayor Sharma, next question for you. It's from Amit Kakade, and I'm going to paraphrase the question. He says, as Mayor said, renewable energy markets in India are very competitively priced. Solar energy is pretty cheap, and offshore wind is relatively expensive. So, Mayor, does India have a future in offshore wind, and will it only work with, say, government sort of filling the viability gap?
Offshore wind No question is expensive. The fact is, given the capacity addition that we need in renewables, we can't afford to turn our back on any possibilities. The time will come, and I suspect the time will come sooner than we expect, perhaps definitely before 2030, when we will need to explore the areas that are close enough to grid connections offshore that we will be able to put up wind farms in. Whether or not it will be as competitive as other forms of renewable energy is really not the point. The point is that will it be competitive with new fossil fuel energy? And the answer there is probably yes, especially as more capacity gets built in heavy lifting, helicopters, etc. Once there is more global capacity, some of which will flow to India in offshore wind, that will reduce prices overall. And remember, the only thing that we need to see is it competitive with new fossil fuel? And as long as it is, there's probably going to be a place for it in India's energy mix.
Thank you. Vasant Kamath sends us a question, and I'm going to ask Dr. Dhawan to take a shot at answering it. How can startups partner with Denmark-based enterprises in animal husbandry? Let me add to the question. Dr. Dhawan, what does the Indian animal husbandry sector need? What are the gaps that it needs to fill?
Animal husbandry sector in the country ranges right from the animal feed. Right now, the feed which we are giving to our animals is not nutritious enough. And it's also leading to a lot of bolting in the animals, as well as the methane emission is very, very high. So a sort of probiotics, perhaps, that is being given to the animals in other countries. The quality of the kettle itself, and His Excellency Gupte has already mentioned about artificial insemination and sperm being transported to India. So it's right from improving the quality of kettle, the right quality of feed to be given to the animals, proper technologies for milking the animal, and thereafter the processing of milk, because many a times quite a bit of milk is lost in the process. So therefore, it's the entire dairy sector where one would like to have input coming from Denmark. And now the lifestyles are changing in the country, and people, of course, I should say most of us are consuming a lot of imported cheese. So why not to produce it within the country, getting technology from Denmark? So already the pellet is there. People want to have that taste, and therefore those technologies can also be developed through proper food processing. So it will be win-win for the farmer. Whatever they produced will be utilized, and it will be good for the consumers.
Thank you, Dr. Dhawan. Veer Sharma, back to you for the next question. Gayatri Ramachandran asks somewhat hopefully, can income tax be abolished and people pay a high tax for exceeding consumption of water and electricity? So is a progressive consumption tax the way to reduce our consumption, Veer?
No. I will say that the reason for income tax is because income tax is, in the end, the price that you pay for a fairer society. You're asking me, in addition, what is the price that I will pay for a greener society, or a society at any rate that's been put on the path to a green transition? That's a different goal, and it should be a different tax. But I completely agree with the questioner that some form of economic impact needs to be imposed on people who overuse resources, whether it is water or it is the carbon budget that we all share. I think that the fairest and most sensible way to do that is for progressive user fees on water and on electricity, and a flat carbon tax in general. One of the things that I'm very upset about, and that has been a major negative in the past 5 years, has been the turn away in the West, in particular, against carbon taxes. And you see this particularly on the left in Europe and America, where the concern is that carbon taxes do not address income inequality, or may, in some cases, very limited cases, worsen inequality. And that is not the point. Carbon taxes are not to address inequality. Income taxes address inequality. Carbon taxes address the green transformation. You cannot turn on carbon taxes the way that people in France and California and so forth have done recently.
Gustavo asks, we would like to know if under the Indo-Danish Green Strategic Partnership, Are there any public funding calls that have already been planned? Public funding to support industry and academia collaborations across both countries? Ambassador Svane.
Thank you very much indeed. A very, very important question. We launched a so-called advanced plan as part of the Green Strategic Partnership, and we had 4 tracks, one on energy, one on water, one on climate change, and one on finance. And we're looking into how we can bring into this Green Strategic Partnership all the funds that we have publicly in Denmark, as well as semi-private and also the sovereign funds and pension funds. We have already embarked upon a number of programs with energy and soon with water, where we are bringing in finance. So I think that's important. And yesterday, in fact, I was launching together with Niti Ayog and others, a program we called a kind of water challenge, where we are inviting the youngsters, the academics, as well as the entrepreneurs, really to come up with solutions, new innovative solutions as to water, and water is one of the big things. So I think while we are walking, we are coming up with new schemes, new ways of bringing in funds, and it's so important.
Thank you, Ambassador Svane. May I now request ASHIMA THUKRAL, Public Diplomacy Officer, Embassy of Denmark, to switch on her audio and video. ASHIMA.
I would like to thank all our distinguished speakers, Ambassador Freddy Svane, Ambassador Ajit Gupte, our speaker, Dr. VIBHA DHAWAN, Finn Mortensen, and Mehish Sharma. Then I would also like to thank our partners for this webinar, CII, DI, ITBA, Climate Collective, and IDCC. Then last but not least, I would also like to thank our moderator, SURESH, VENKAT, and his team, and also my good colleague, Shankar from Bangalore. I would like to thank all the participants for joining in for the webinar.
Thank you, ASHIMA. Now that brings us to the end of this webinar. Thank you, speakers and panelists. Thank you, ambassadors. Thank you, most importantly, members of the audience, for taking time out to attend and send us your questions. Thank you to our partners, CII, Confederation of Danish Industry, Climate Collective, and the Indian Danish Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all very much. I wish you have a great weekend, have a happy new year, and always wear a mask.